Warning. Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Cops and other law enforcement people of Reddit, what were some cases you worked on that made you think, even if for a moment, that something supernatural/paranormal was going on? I have posted this before, but here is my possessed woman story. Spoiler alert, as a result of posting this last time, users suggested she could have suffered from catatonic schizophrenia. Was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thoughts was to tell her to pay attention, but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her, she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help, but medically nothing seemed wrong. As I am pondering what on earth I should do, the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now spinning is not illegal, and I'm starting to think this girl is one of those protesters that wind up police. I've dealt with Troll Station before, so I think crack on, spin to your heart's content. Then she loses her balance and falls, whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So I call an ambulance, but she seems fine. Still not talking, but she is looking up at the sky. It's nice day, so fine, enjoy the sun. I do some writing and look back at her now bright red face and watering eyes and realize she is trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look directly at the sun. That's a new one on me, so now I'm holding a book or something above her to shield her eyes. Ambulance arrives and we get to hospital, and now she has forgotten how to walk. Now I'm 99% sure she is a wind-up merchant, but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair she strikes up "Hey, I'm a little teapot" pose and keeps this up for the next hour, zero movement, just frozen with her arms out. So I now have three potential situations. She is pretending to be frozen in time. She is suffering from a mental health issue. She has been possessed. By now I'm convinced it's the latter, but I section her and leave her with professionals. A week later I call the hospital and they tell me she is still frozen. Obligatory, not my story but my uncle's. Years ago my uncle told us about a woman who would call the police station just about every night claiming that fairies or elves were breaking into her house and stealing her food. As is custom, every time she calls, they send a unit to check on her. My uncle gets it about 2 to 3 times per week. Every night they stop by her house and reassure her that no one has broken in and calm her down. One night when he gets to the house, she has poured powdered sugar all over the floor to record their tracks, and my uncle says he literally has to do a double take. All over the floor of her kitchen are these little tracks, tiny like nothing he's seen before. His partner starts taking photos and trying to figure it out. A few other officers come in, as most of them had gotten the call to her house too and wanted to see it. 10 police officers, all completely baffled as to what these weird little prints are. Turns out a possum had babies and they were sneaking into her kitchen for warmth or food. The prints looked so foreign because most of the time baby possums are carried by their mother, not running around. 7 are rounded up and released in a less residential area. Police officer working the desk, 1500 to 2300, fire alarm signal goes off. Many years ago the police department offered alarm monitoring service, still had 10 to 12 places that were hardwired and it would require pulling apart a lot of equipment to disconnect the system, so we just kept it going. First shift dispatch is already punched in, so she took it. I'm headed out the door to the fire department when 911 rings from the same address. I answer it. No one in the other end, assume they barely got to call before passing out. I bolt out the back door, hop in a squad car, radio in the 911 call on channel 3 that both police/fire can hear and that I'm going directly to the house. Arrive just as another unit shows up. No signs of smoke, no sign of anything. Older woman comes walking up the street pushing a wheelchair with an elderly lady, her mother. They live there and just went out for an early evening stroll before dinner. Tell them what we have going on. Nobody else lives there, and as far as the elderly lady can remember, the alarm was disconnected from the house years ago during some renovations. They don't have any alarm system either, just a couple of smoke/fire detectors. We do a walk around the house, get to the back door off the kitchen, and you can clearly see and smell gas. We turned off the gas at the main, Set up some fans to air it out and find a cracked gas line going to the oven. Daughter said she spilled some coffee she was making for their walk and had to move the oven a few inches to clean, probably broke the line pushing the oven back in. Nothing else in the house is disturbed and both phones are on the hook. Fire chief shows up about 15 minutes into the call. He goes over to the two ladies and gives them both a hug. He's nearly in tears. The elderly lady in the wheelchair, her husband was the fire chief 60+ years ago for our department. The daughter, her husband passed away a few years ago. He was also a member of our department. Never believed in ghosts or spirits, but that call made me think maybe people who spend their lives doing good are allowed by some power to look over their loved ones every so often. It's probably too late for this to surface, but this is my dad's story. He went to a call where a father had gone crazy and decided to shoot his family. He killed his wife and was looking around trying to find his 5-year-old son to shoot him. The boy had run outside and was trying to hide on the side of the house behind the trash cans. The father eventually found him and point-blank emptied nearly a full magazine at the boy. When my dad arrived, they found the boy in shock, hiding right where his dad found him, not a wound on his body. There were bullet holes in the side of the house all around the boy. When they finally got to question him about it, they asked him what happened when his dad found him on the side of the yard. The boy replied, "The angel was in front of me with a shield, and he saved me. He pushed the gun away from me." Fire EMS here. This is not my story, it happened on a different shift, but captain working overtime with us one day told it to us, and it creeped me out. The captain was on the first due engine company that was dispatched to a residential fire alarm in the middle of the night. Our dispatch protocols require us to send the first unit emergency to a fire alarm, while the second due engine and ladder company respond routine. We go to tons of fire alarms and 99% of the time they are caused by a faulty system or burned food, so we usually don't get too worked up over them. Anyways, as they approach the neighborhood they see the orange glow in the distance, and when they get on scene they find a 4,000 square foot house with heavy fire showing on the rear end that had already broken through the roof. The call was then upgraded to a working structure fire and more units were dispatched to assist. The captain of the first due stayed on the outside the whole time. He was incident commander until the 1st Battalion chief arrived on scene and took over, and then he assumed the safety role. So, he's on the outside, in radio contact with crews that are inside fighting the fire. After the bulk of the fire had been extinguished and as operations were winding down, the captain sees smoke inside a second-story window and asks crews inside to go inside the room on the BC corner to make sure the fire hadn't spread to the other side of the house. The crews search for a few minutes and radio back, "There's no room there, sir." The captain is a bit confused, as he is staring at what is clearly a window that is attached to a room of some sort. He relays detailed instructions of where the room should be to the crews inside, and they again advise that they can't find anything. Incredulous, the captain asks the incident commander for permission to go inside of the structure so he can show the interior crews exactly where the room in question is. His request is granted, and he goes inside, walks up the staircase, and walks towards the corner in question. There's no room there. Just a hallway with a corner. No doorway, no window, no room. Knowing that there has to be something behind the wall, they breach the drywall and crawl through to find a child's bedroom. The bedroom had a dresser, a desk, and a perfectly made bed that looked as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. For whatever reason, the owners of the home decided to wall off the bedroom and leave it just as it was, untouched and inaccessible. The captain said it was one of the strangest and eeriest things he had seen in a while. Cop here. Partner and I were dispatched to a welfare check. Elderly guy, nobody had seen him in a few days, mail overflowing in mailbox, missed a doctor's appointment, car hasn't moved, etc. We both know we are about to find a body. We arrive on scene and can't get anyone to the door, look through the window and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. My partner is a corporal and pulls rank and makes me go first. Door is unlocked and as soon as we open it we smell a mostly fresh dead body. Almost relieved, We both enter and he tells me to check vitals on dead dude. He is obviously dead, with lividity, dried feces on him and dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath, rolls over, and asks why we are in his house. At this point we both start screaming oh shits and what the fucks as we both run out of the house. We called EMS and they transported him. Said they couldn't get a blood pressure or pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital. I still get jokes about raising the dead. This is a good supernatural/paranormal story rather than a creepy one. I'm a detective and spent some time as an expert on sex crimes and crimes against children. It was the best/worst assignment I've had. One case I had came in at midnight. A young woman with a toddler comes into one of the precincts to report her ex-boyfriend raped her during a custody argument. Long story short, it was legit, and one of the most violent and sadistic cases I've ever had, so I'll spare the gruesome details. I still have no idea how this woman made her own way to a precinct with a toddler. Part of the investigation requires me to talk to the toddler. Victim said the toddler was present for everything. I'm a child forensic interviewer as well. During the interview the toddler recalls their father becoming angry and hitting the mom. Then, the toddler said that the nice woman showed up and she couldn't see past the nice woman. The nice woman held her and told her that they were both going to be safe and sang her a song in a different language. The toddler said the nice woman went over to the front door and knocked on the door. Then, the nice woman helped them and their mom to the car before flying away. In the victim's interview, she said that her ex-boyfriend had a knife to her throat and put it to the skin to cut her throat open, but he got distracted for some reason then ran out of the apartment. She had no explanation why. The suspect was caught about 8 hours later. He confessed to absolutely everything. When I asked him about the knife to the throat, he said this: "I swear to God I was gonna cut the bitch's throat open. But I thought I heard a knock at the door and thought it was the police. Once I saw it was clear, I ran outside." He is now serving life in prison, and the mom and toddler are safe and doing well. I'd love to know more about the nice woman. Former EMT, firefighter here. One night we got a call to do a wellness check on someone who dialed 911 but didn't respond to the operator. We pull up to the address and the house looks perfectly quaint and a little old lady greets us at the door. We asked her if she knew who placed the call, but she told us that she lived alone since her husband died. We barely got back to the station before a call comes in again, same address as before. So we drive back out, talk to the old lady again, then leave again. And just as we get back to the station, same call, same address, no response. We drive out there again, believing that the old lady must have been confused. But this time when we pulled into the driveway, the old lady wasn't at the door to greet us. There was no reply at the door, but it was unlocked. We take a peek inside to find the old lady was on the floor and wasn't breathing. We rushed in to help and got her to a hospital in stable condition. When she woke up in the ambulance, she still claimed that she never called us, and that we arrived almost immediately after she had fallen. It was a 15-minute drive to her house from the station. Before she was admitted to the hospital, she asked me and another EMT if we could bring her knitting needles and bag of clothes to her in the hospital. I offered to pick up her stuff because I had a friend who lived in that area and we were gonna hang out anyways. I pick up my friend and drive to the lady's house. I ran inside to grab the bag and knitting stuff while my buddy sat in the car. But just as I was leaving, I swear I felt a hand on my back and heard a voice say thank you. When I get back in the car, my friend asked me why couldn't the lady's husband bring her stuff to the hospital. I explained that her husband was dead, but when I said that, my friend said, "But I saw an old guy in the window." He smiled and waved at me. At first I refused to believe in anything supernatural, so I called the police and asked them to do a sweep of the house. I thought it was a squatter. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and no one was inside. I later brought my friend to visit the lady. He started describing the old dude who was in the window, but the old lady almost immediately started tearing up and said, "That's my Harold." This is unexplained, and probably just coincidence, but I still never mention it to my coworkers. I spent some time as a homicide investigator. We would respond to all apparent suicides and investigate them just to make sure it wasn't a homicide. Usually we determined a motive for suicide and found a note or other indicator that the person killed themselves. One guy just taped a note to his chest that said "Happy now, bitch," and made sure his wife found him after he hanged himself. But occasionally you get a case where all forensic evidence indicates that the person killed themselves, but there's no note and no discernible reason why this person would be suicidal. These are people in good health with decent careers and a seemingly happy family life. But who knows what's really going on with someone? Here's the part that freaks me out. I've worked maybe 10 suicides like this. The last 3 before I left homicide all had the same thing at the scene. These was a little decorative wicker lighthouse at each location. It was the same lighthouse, same design and painted white and blue. It stuck out to me the first time because it was by the bed where the body was, but 2 weeks later I saw the same damn lighthouse on another suicide and even pointed out the coincidence to a patrol officer. A few months later I go on another suicide and I see that same wicker lighthouse. That's when it clicks that it's always been unexplained suicides. I go back and look at crime scene photos from every suicide I've worked. In 2 of them I see what could be the wicker lighthouse, but the angle is off and there's too much junk around to say for sure. I dunno. I thought it was creepy as hell, but I transferred a couple of months later and I let it go. Edit. Well, that got more of a response than I was anticipating. To answer the question of was it a serial killer, I very much doubt it. These were clearly suicides, most of which had no feasible alternative explanation. We work every suicide as if it were a homicide. An apparent suicide is almost always a suicide, but we are on the side of caution. Also, while serial killers are actually more common than most people think, they rarely leave calling cards or anything like you see in movies. It's usually some fucked up dude that has a particular taste. I really do think it was an odd coincidence, but it was still pretty fucking creepy. My dad used to work as a correctional officer at Goulburn Jail in Australia, which is probably one of the oldest and hardest prisons there. A story he tells of his time there is one I always remember. He said that the whole place was creepy anyway, not helped by some of the inmates at the time, including the notorious Ivan Milat, on which Wolf Creek is based. Anyway, first thing he noticed was that dogs would outright refuse to enter the prison. He said they couldn't get them past the gate no matter how hard they tried. But the creepiest occurrence was one night when they heard the sound of running booted footsteps. Everyone was in their cell so they couldn't figure out what was causing it. Next thing, all the doors of the open and unoccupied cells on the top floor were banged shut, one after the other with loud clangs. Then they see the source of the running noise. Now Dad swears this is what he and his colleague, so he has another witness, saw. Apparently they looked up and saw what looked like disembodied hobnail boots run down the aisle right over their heads, banging as they went. Dad decided to stop working in the prison not long after this. Super creepy. I'm a CMA, was working night shift in an Alzheimer's unit. All of the residents were in and out with their lucidity. One lady seemed to be having hallucinations, which was pretty common for those residents. She insisted her husband was there and she talked to him, scooted over so he could sit next to her, etc. etc. Just generally acted like there was another person was there when there wasn't. Her husband, Jim, had been dead for a couple of years. She seemed happy, and there's no point arguing with someone with dementia anyway, so we left them to visit. After a while she quiets down and says Jim left. Across the hall the lady in that room turns on her call light. Her complaint? This man won't get out of my room. We don't see anything and ask what man? Who is it? She turns to the nothingness beside her bed and says who are you? Then turns back to us and says his name is Jim. I've been in law enforcement for nearly 6 years and I have had a few supernatural things occur during my shifts. The most recent one came from a 911 hang-up call. I was riding 2-man on a summer night and it was probably around 2 or 3 a.m. when we get a call for a 911 hang-up. The only call comments was a call was placed to 911 and upon answering it the person hung up. When dispatch attempted to call the number back, no one answered. The area in which I was working this night I have basically spent my whole career in. There aren't a whole lot of streets I had yet to respond to. However, the address this call came in from, they used GPS coordinates to find the closest location since the caller hung up, I had never been to. I had driven past this road many times but never actually revived a call from it. We pull up to this old dirt road and it has a metal chain going across the entrance with a sign that says no trespassing. Because we have to figure out what is going on, me and my partner continue on foot up this long dirt/gravel road. The road was maybe about 100 years long. The shitty party was that on each side of the road was a tall chain link fence. Why this was crappy was because now me and my partner were now walking down a fatal funnel. If there happened to be a guy waiting for us at the end of this road with, let's just say, an assault rifle, we would have no place to take cover. Thankfully this did not happen. We eventually reach the end of the road and there are two houses on each side. At first we believe one of these houses is where the 911 call had come from. As I am shining my flashlight at one of the houses I see a figure move from inside. Instantly I'm like, oh shit, people actually live back here. As I thought for sure the houses were going to be vacant. Shortly after, a man and a woman walk outside and ask what is going on. We tell them we received a 911 hang-up call from address 123 Main, made up, and asked if they had called. The man tells us his address is 124 Main and the one across the street is 125 Main, which he says is vacant. He proceeds to tell us there is a 123 Main which is basically in the middle of these tall weeds/forest looking area just to the north of his house. He says the house is vacant and run down and can only be reached on foot. I ask him how far away it is from his house and he says probably a couple of football fields away. Now while all this walking/investigating was going on, we had received I think 2 more 911 hang-up calls. Same address. Same result. Before we made this trek out into the middle of the woods we called for another car and eventually another 2-man unit responded. The 4 of us now wandered out into the woods, 2 of us with our assault rifles out, and followed a barely beaten path to where we assumed we would find a house. Fighting spider webs and low-hanging tree branches we eventually reach our destination. I am terrible at describing things but this house was straight out of any horror movie you wanna imagine. It was run down. Had a tree that had fallen through the middle and had now become incorporated with the house throughout the years. The house was nearly falling apart and was completely overgrown by greenery. Having come this far we decide to continue on, even though we were pretty sure the house would be vacant. After fighting through some thick brush we find our entrance. We each have to climb over some fallen brick walls and other wooden shit before we actually make entry. My biggest fear at this point is this stupid rotten house collapsing on itself and being trapped inside with no one being able to find us. We searched the entire house and like we thought no one inside. And when I say we searched the entire house I mean the entire house. Nothing was left unchecked. Feeling satisfied we all climb our way back out of the bullshittery and start heading back towards where the 2 original houses were. As we walk back dispatch radios us and tells us they received another 911 hang-up call coming from the same address. This time dispatch tells us they were able to make call back and when the person answered they could hear what sounded like a child playing on the phone. The 4 of us looked at each other and decided we were done with this call. We had done everything we could up to that point and were not about to get called back into possibly a demon's house because a child was on the phone. We clear the call and don't receive any more 911 hang-up calls for the rest of the night. Fast forward maybe 6 months and it's dead ass cold winter. 911 hang-up from the same address. This time it's me and 3 guys who weren't there previously. I tell them the story of what happened and all 3 are super psyched and want to check it out. The 4 of us walk back out to this house, now much easier to get to since the cold had killed off a lot of the greens. The 3 of them decide to go into the house. I wait outside as I already had my fun. They don't make it too far once they realize this house is about to collapse on itself. We all leave again. No call back from a child this time. If I ever go out there again, I'll try and get a picture of the house just so when I tell other people the story they can have a better understanding of how fucked this house actually is. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily videos.